welcome to the show. I'm your host, Brent Thomas, and I appreciate you being here with me. We've got a fantastic show lined up for you today. We're going to be going over an article that I think is absolutely fantastic and a little bit unnerving and kind of freaky, but it does highlight a part of the paranormal that comes up actually quite often. And it deals with objects that seem to have attachments, and these objects specifically are toys, children's toys that appear to have some kind of attachment going on or something. It's pretty creepy stuff. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal Podcast. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you all for joining us, and special thank you goes out to all of you who continue to support the podcast and continue to spread the word. Always remember, if any of you out there have experiences of your own that you'd like to share, feel free to email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com. Again, paranormalportalradio@gmail.com, and you too could be a guest on the show. Paranormal, we talk a lot about objects having attachments, and it certainly seems to be a phenomena that shows up quite often in the paranormal. It can be the reason that you have activity in a home is by simply bringing in an object from somewhere else that comes with its own personality attached to it, some energy that is bound to that object, whether it was an object that was important to its former owner, or by some other means or measure, it became, a focal point for some other, energy being or whatever. And, they sometimes linger and they get brought into places. And over a period of time, these places will experience activity. And, it's usually like most hauntings, starts out real slow and subtle and will build over time. Now, a lot of times it's hard for people to know exactly when or where a haunting started. So, otherwise it'd be real easy to go, oh, you know what? I brought that new hat in. It must be the hat. Let's get that out of the house, and boom, there you go. Problem solved. But, it's hard to know, but sometimes it's painfully clear that which objects are the ones that have the issues, because the activity is absolutely focused on these objects. And in the case of these toys, that definitely seems to be the case. Like, the toys themselves seem to have the impression, and the activity centers around those toys themselves, not as if you just brought something in and it became a part of a problem in your home. It's like the toy itself is the problem, because it will go off, it will start triggering, or you're noticing behaviors that it's not supposed to do, and it's doing weird things. So, it's a very real thing that people deal with. And, I found this collection of, stories from thoughtcatalog.com. And, this is by Eric Redding. And it was actually from 2016. It's from November 19th, 2016. And this is 9 true and terrifying tales of haunted toys tormenting their owners. And so I thought, wow, this is kind of creepy stuff. Let's check it out. So, that's where we're going. Buckle up. It's about to get spooky. All right. So starting out this article, again, look at the description if you want to link to it. I will certainly do my best to read through all 9 of them, but if in the case we don't, you can check out this and a bunch of other great articles that are hosted over on Thought Catalog. It's like pretty much whatever you're interested in over on Thought Catalog, you can find articles and lists and entries that line up with your interests. It's really a fantastic site. So please support what they're doing over there. Please visit it. I know you'll love it if you do. So check them out. But let's check out the first one. And this one is simply called When You Watch. And, just for the sake of explanation, these articles generally are what I like to call Reddit scrapes. So they will take a Reddit thread and take comments that people have submitted to a Reddit thread and build articles around them. And I love these articles because they are a really, really profound cross-section of incredible activity. So again, let's get into the first one here. And this one's titled When You Watch. It says, when I was probably 12, we got turbo twists from some friend's parents or something. The details escape me. And full disclosure, I have no idea what a turbo twist is, but I'm assuming it's some kind of toy, maybe like a Bop It or something like that. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. But again, I'm sure a quick Google search and you'll know what turbo twists are if that's important to you. So, the article continues, somebody thought they would be educational instead of below my sister and I's education levels. We had a red one and a green one, and to the best I can remember, it was the red one that went bad. But that detail escapes me also. And it was dark at the time, so I wasn't even sure which one it was until the morning. Every time you turn on one of these by turning either end, the following sound is emitted by the speaker on the left end. Hey, dude, is that you? Hit it and let's go. You practically needed a user's manual to figure it out, but it means that the bottom on the right end is essentially the swipe to unlock, and that's what it's telling you to do. One of the features is that you can customize what name it calls you by, but you only have a limited set of options. The voice acted, most of which absolutely sucked. So we just left it on dude, turn it off and turn it off and it plays a short slap bass riff. Like, I'm going to do my best to verbalize what they've written here, but it's da-da-dow, da-dow. That's like a slap bass line. So I don't know. It probably sounds pretty accurate, but I'm not really sure. It says, one night I was almost asleep in my bed and I hear the chime. Do-do-do-do, but immediately, ba-da-dow, da-dow. And it just turned on and shut off all by itself, halfway across the room. And then it did it again. And again. And I don't mean it got some amount into the opening or that it even paused between shutting off and turning back on consistently. For the first few minutes, it was nonstop. Hey, dude, da-dow, da-dow, da-dow. Da-da-da-dow, da-dow, da-dow. I'm trying to read this, folks, but anyway, it's just basically just keeps going on and off, on and off, on and off. And then it started taking longer breaks in between. Well, I was pretty freaked out at this point, watching it as intently as I could with my agonizing lack of night vision. I rolled over onto my other side, trying to ignore it. And this is when things got bad. All of a sudden, it just plain stops. I don't make the connection until I turn to look again, and it starts turning on and off again. I turn back and forth a few times to make sure, spending a lot of time on each side, and every time, it freaking confirms my suspicions. It only plays when I'm watching it. I spent the rest of the night tucked under the covers, huddled up and facing away from the demon-possessed piece of evil. Not sure if it's silently creeping up on me somehow. I'm too scared to look. Only to hear it louder and closer to my bed, like the freaking mannequins and I'm not sure what this is, NM2, but noisy, if that's a video game or whatever, I don't know. But, yeah, that's creepy. In the morning, I was afraid to throw it out and afraid to keep it. I wanted to believe it hadn't really happened, so I convinced myself that it hadn't until the next night when it happened again. Quiet all day, no matter how hard I try to replicate the freakiness. Then come midnight, it glitches again. After that, I was like, nope, took the batteries out, which seemed to work. It happened again one more time, months later. Took it apart in the morning, and there were the batteries in it. And that was submitted by someone who uses the name Rainfly_X. So that's a creepy story. And the bizarre part is it was apparently very aware when this person was looking at it. Again, it seemed to just be one toy. Now, I don't know that this came with this problem or if the problem came to the toy. I don't know. after it was owned, because it doesn't sound like it was an immediate thing. It just sounds like it eventually just went freaky. And I don't know, maybe that was the toy that, whatever spirit is present had the most fun with, but it only seemed to bother that one toy, and the only issue happened with the one toy. So I don't know. Very strange. You would think that if it was just a playful spirit, okay, to play with that toy, but then probably get to a different one or whatever, just to roll the circuit, so to speak. But they only mentioned the one toy, so that is interesting. Could the attachment have been there, or could it have come into there after they owned it? I don't know. That's anybody's guess. All right, so let's check out the second one in this article, and this is The Tiny Toy Cat. And this one's kind of a heartbreaker. I read it just a few moments ago, and I was like, oh. Yeah, but it's kind of beautiful, but kind of tragic, of course. You'll see what I mean. The Tiny Toy Cat. We bought a toy cat small enough to fit in your hand. When you squeezed it, it made a noise just like our half Siamese, and I would occasionally harass my partner with it. The battery started to die, and it would make this rasping emphysema-like sound. And then it stopped working, so we put it on the third floor. Our house is old, a typical 1924 square, and we don't heat the third floor in the winter. We just store things up there. We didn't throw it away because it was cute, and about this time, our one cat, Cassie, grew ill. After a month of treatment, our vet was near tears, telling us there was nothing he could do. It was 4 days before Christmas, and we decided to euthanize her the next day. We chose to do it at home, not wanting her to die in the arms of strangers on a stainless steel table under a fluorescent lights. I dug a grave in the clay in the back yard and left it open and let the snow fall into the grave. And I went up to the third floor to get an old blanket to bury her in, and brought the toy cat downstairs. I squeezed it again. Now it was silence. Nothing. Well, the vet arrived, and we took Cassie into the living room, pulled the pocket doors shut so she could not wander off, and she was euthanized in our arms on the living room rug. We went outside with our coats, and we laid Cassie in the grave, and I filled it in. The next day, I took all the cat furniture out to the garage, washed all the cat blankets and food bowls, and put all the toys in a box and threw the medications away. That night, as we were in bed settling in to the new silence, the toy cat meowed, and it was a single perfect long Siamese wail. We got up and walked into the office and picked up the cat, and the only sound it would make was the emphysema rasp, and then nothing. We tell ourselves the cat meowed without being squeezed because it had warmed up from being stored in the unheated attic. We still have that little cat. She sits on a shelf at eye level and smiles at us when we walk through the hallway. We squeeze it from time to time, but it's never made another sound. That was by Uncle Wiggily. That's a beautiful story. Maybe that was the cat saying, I'm okay. Maybe that was that confirmation, that last goodbye. I don't know. I mean, it's anybody's guess, but I think that seems to come up a lot with people losing pets, that there's some symbol that will be shown to those people. And my mom had a little white dog, and it was, I think the breed was called a Maltese. It was an adorable dog, and this dog and my mom were really pretty inseparable. They were really close, but the dog had a tradition. And I've shared this on the live stream shows several times, but I'm not sure I've ever mentioned it here in the podcast. But her dog unfortunately got sick and did pass. There was some kind of weird anemia or infection or whatever, and there was nothing that could be done. It just, time was up, and so the dog did pass, and that was really hard on my mom and my dad too. They both really loved this dog, but again, the dog had a real common tradition. Every night it would crawl into my mom's bed and it would do like circles, kind of like when your dog's going to poop and there's some strange code that they got where they got to know exactly where the right place to poop is. And they'll circle around and do weird zigzags and stuff. And then there's some secret criteria that it hits and boom, they do their thing. Well, this dog did that when it would lay down. It would do this pathway and sniffing and running this circuit, and then would eventually, boom, plop down and fall to sleep. And she noticed that from time to time, even still, she'll be laying in bed and suddenly she'll feel the footsteps tapping around on her bed in this motion, like circular motions, and changing direction and looking, and then suddenly a little thump, as if every night he's still coming to sleep. So maybe this cat meowing was something like that. Maybe just a one-off, but still. It's still a beautiful thing, right? Now this next one is extraordinarily short, and this one is just simply titled, Bless You. Number 3, Bless You. When I was a kid, I used to sleep with dolls. One night I woke up and heard a sneeze and my face got all wet. I didn't sneeze, and the only thing next to me was my doll. That's just awful. Gosh. That was by Reddit user Suno, S-U-N-O. That's creepy. I don't know what to make of that, folks. I mean, I don't know. Obviously dolls don't have mucus glands and stuff, so the whole, sneezing and spraying you is doesn't seem likely, but maybe something was there and able to do that. I don't know. What a creepy story. It's just a little thing, but it's plenty creepy. I think I'd be done sleeping with dolls after that point. Is called James. This one's a bit longer, so we'll dive into this one now. It says, I recently moved into a new house and now I live alone. The house is near a small town, maybe 2 miles away. The house itself in the middle of a nicely wooded area in a smaller town, which is perfect for me. I love the serenity of the woods, being untainted by urban life. The idea of having a barn thrilled me, with all the possibilities of what I could turn it into. My parents recently gave me this house as a graduation gift. Wow, what a great gift. The house was given to them by my grandparents, which is strange because we didn't live in this house growing up. In fact, my parents never mentioned it to me until I graduated college, admitting that they pretty much preferred to be in the city, living being in the middle of nowhere. My mother lived in the house briefly until she was around 7, when my grandparents decided to pack up and move one day. They never sold the house. They said there were too many memories, and at the very least, my parents could use it as a vacation home. But they never did. The house was in a slight state of disrepair. However, I couldn't care less. I was a homeowner. Mowing the yard and clearing the branches was the easy part. The real work began within the house. Dusting old furniture, clearing cobwebs, and throwing away old canned food, and it took me about 2 weeks of cleaning until I decided that it was sanitary enough to move into. I decided to take a few weeks just to relax. I was tired of partying, and I didn't want to start searching for a job just yet. So I spent my first day in the house hiking near the creek, fishing in a small pond, and meeting folks in town. That night, however, I was restless. There was no TV, and I didn't have any books or other than textbooks. I needed something to do after it got dark out, so I decided to start exploring the house. In the attic, to my surprise, was filled with random furniture, toys, and trinkets from my mom's childhood. I found baseballs, cards, jump ropes, little football helmet, action figures, a dollhouse, board games, etc. And this was fascinating to me. I then found an antique dresser, which I found my mom's diary. Jackpot. I can read this at night until I fall asleep. Not this night, however. I was tired and decided to go to sleep in the new bedroom in my beautiful new home. Sleep came fast, however. I was woken by creaking from the stairs in the attic. And this is expected living in an old house. I was sure I'd just get used to it. The next day I decided to check out the barn. I decided to turn it into a hobby lounge where I could do woodworking or whatever my wavering enthusiasms desired. The barn was in fact in pristine condition, aside from a pile of cigarette butts in the corner and a musky smell which hung in the air. The smell was the only thing that ever bothered me. I'm a non-smoker and I just hate cigarettes. The smell they give off makes me want to vomit. There was a very unstable looking ladder leading up to the loft, which I decided not to use. The last thing I needed was to break my neck in the middle of nowhere. There didn't appear to be anything there up there, aside from some hay creeping over the edge. Well, after picking up the butts, I realized that I had more free time than I'd planned, since I assumed I would just spend the day cleaning the barn. I decided to explore the attic more. As I could not find my car keys to drive into town, oddly enough, I swore that I left them on the kitchen table next to my wallet, as this is what I've always done with any set of car keys that I own. Aside from the old mirror and a pile of old cloths, I couldn't find anything of much interest. As I left, I noticed there were less dolls than I remembered, and I could swear one of them was not there before. Well, whatever. I decided to just read my mom's diary. Lying in my bed, I read through the diary, laughing at the entries of the diary. Several of them mentioned her older brother, James, throwing tantrums for no apparent reason, punching himself in the face, or trying to fling his baseball bat into a tree. My mom must have had a very overactive imagination as a child, because she had no siblings and grew up a single child. I marked the page it was on and went downstairs to get a snack, growing more annoyed by the constant creaking in the attic. I decided to go to town the next morning and find someone who could fix it. Remembering I had lost my keys, I decided to retrace my steps so I could leave for town early in the morning. The sun was beginning to set, a dull orange peeking over the horizon, so I decided to check the barn before it became too dark to see. I brought a flashlight just in case it did become too dark, and I couldn't find my keys. However, I did find a few cigarette butts in the corner, which I had apparently missed from earlier. I set down the flashlight and scooped them up and threw them away. After an unsuccessful search, I glanced up towards the loft and noticed there was a doll propped up against the wall. I could have sworn the doll was in the attic yesterday, so against my better judgment, I climbed the rickety ladder to the loft, and there was nothing up there aside from an old hammer, the doll, and a pile of hay. I picked up the doll and climbed down and walked towards my house. When I entered the front door, I noticed my keys on the ground. Only the car ignition key was mangled and bent. This is a horror story. This is absolutely terrifying. Annoyed that I somehow must have stepped on the key to bend it, I decided to just go to bed and walk to town in the morning. Before going to sleep, I cracked open my mom's old diary to read, and she was surprisingly articulate for a 7-year-old, and I became so entranced by the story that the old house's creaking no longer bothered me. The diary's entries became disturbing, however. James began hurting himself in front of the family and starting fires, and the story was becoming very morbid for a 7-year-old's imagination. The most disturbing entry, James had tried to take out my grandfather with a knife and ran off into the woods after stabbing him. My mother bearing witness to the entire scene. After returning from the hospital, James had not returned. Dead animals started appearing on outside the front door, and messages were being written on the house with blood. She wrote how her grandparents have been whispering among themselves for a week now and no longer allowing her out of the house alone. She also frequently wrote how much she missed James. The diary ended there, with no mention of when or why they moved. It just stopped. My heart was racing, my pupils dilated, and my heavy breathing silent. I didn't want to stay here anymore. True or not, the diary chilled me to the bone. I was aware of everything due to my adrenaline rush, the wind blowing outside, and every little creak the house made. Wait, the house was no longer creaking. It was dead silent. I pushed my bed against the door, barricading myself in the room, and I moved my dresser in front of the window, knocking over my lamp and the only light source. The blanket of darkness covered the room, the only source of light coming from the tiny keyhole in the door. Determined to stay awake until sunrise, I sat with my back against the wall, next to the bed. The floor began creaking down the hallway, stopping right outside of my door, and then stopping. It said stopping right outside my door, and then stopping. Okay. Well, that's how it's written. So, the light seeped in through the keyhole when dark. I tried to listen over the deafening sound of air entering and exiting my lungs. And what was worse was the constant thumping of blood entering and leaving my heart. A few minutes after the soul-crushing fear, light returned through the keyhole, followed by more creaking. I refused to look through the keyhole to confirm my worst fear. After what seemed like days, morning finally came. The light creeped around my dresser, blocking the window, and I moved it and waited until the sun saturated the whole forest. Cautiously, I moved my bed and bolted down the stairs outside. I didn't need a car. I was going to run to town. I ran into the barn to quickly grab my heavy mag flashlight as a blunt weapon, if I needed it. I plucked it from the pile of cigarettes it was hiding under and ran down the dirt path into town. I called my parents to come pick me up from the Greasy Spoon Diner, making sure to sit in a booth, which was against a wall and not a window. Aftermath, I did call the police, who insisted they found nothing out of the ordinary, and both my mom and grandparents deny any existence of a family member named James. I returned to the house with several friends, and my parents, mind you, to retrieve my belongings. I was not living in this damned house. There were blank pages from the diary stacked nicely on the nightstand. However, we couldn't find the diary, no matter how much we searched. My mom vehemently denied ever having one and scolded me for smoking in the barn and littering the ground with cigarette butts and having such an active imagination. No, it's all completely true. I decided it was already too long to include the long aftermath of the story, but there is more. I lived in a hotel for a while after the ordeal, and a few days after it happened, I decided to drop by my parents' house. I walked in on my mom and grandparents having an explosive argument, while my father sat silently, looking with his mouth gaping wide open. The argument obviously ceased the moment I walked in, and they muttered something about the topic being politics. Not long after my mom admitted herself into a mental health hospital for a few weeks for stress of losing money in the stock market. She seemed different since her stay at the hospital, but it's probably due to the heavy medication they put her on. She does see one for anxiety problems and recently moved to New York. She likes areas that are crowded with people. We don't talk about what happened anymore. The way I see it, there are only three possibilities of what had happened. First, that I went psychotic and bent my own keys, smoked all the cigarettes, and moved the dolls around. Then after a few days of my psychotic break, I decided to run to town and make up a story about what happened. I don't believe this option at all, although I'd like to believe this one the most. Second is that some ghost or spirit was trying to tell me its story. I don't really believe this one at all either. A ghost smoking cigarettes? I don't really believe in the supernatural like ghosts anyways, but I sure do believe in deranged maniacs. The third is that James really did exist and was living in the barn house. He bent my keys and was smoking. He was what walked down the hall and looked into my room through the keyhole. I guess my grandparents believed him to be gone when they gave me the house. I assume that what happened scared my mother for life and she doesn't want to talk about it. I believe this 100%, but I refuse to go back to the house and confirm it. And that was submitted by someone using the moniker Thunder Egg, but the egg is a 3 and then GG. So it's a profoundly intense story. I will say that stories like that are well, there's two ways to look at it. It could be a factual event that somebody just was very articulate and recorded very well. I mean, literacy does not mean hoax, but oftentimes many stories are written like most people write, and they're just kind of to the point, not overly dramatic, or, well, I mean, the stories can be incredibly dramatic and incredibly powerful, but generally they're written in such a way as, like, you know, you might write a note or an email, just very to the point. This one was written very, very well. And so it does cause me to at least consider the fact that this just might be a creative writing exercise for this person. None of it may have happened at all. But at the same time, after having done this for so many years, heard stories of all kinds from people of all walks of life, both incredibly educated and articulate and more simple, down-to-earth people that have very modest educations or very little education. And while their storytelling varies quite a bit in that spectrum, it doesn't mean that one story is more real than the other because of how it was written or relayed. But it does make you wonder, because again, I don't know this person, this Thunder Egg person. I don't have the ability to sit down and ask questions and to kind of come to an understanding of these events outside of the fact that they were very thorough in their narrating it for this story. But again, I don't pretend to be the arbiter of truth either. It's, I've heard stories that are hard for me to get my head around, but after hearing it from the witnesses, I have no doubt they experienced what they said they experienced. But it doesn't mean that I understand it. It doesn't mean that it makes sense. And then there's a story like this that's so well written. It could be a book. It could be part of a novel. And it's just very well done. And that is a compliment. But it also makes you wonder, well, God, is this just, you know, a creative writer just doing an exercise of creative writing? And I guess it's at the end of the day, it's all up to you. Certainly believe whatever you think it makes sense to you, and discard the things that you don't. Because with all of this stuff, none of us know. There's nobody that knows for sure. But those are interesting stories. Very, very well written though. Wow. That was really well done. All right. So let's get to the next one. And this is the fifth story on this Thought Catalog article. And this one's called Mariner Moose. Sorry, my voice is cracky. I'm doing the best I can, but I do apologize if I sound so scruffed. All right. Okay. So my first and second, I guess, supernatural encounters happened when my family was living in Maine. We lived in this not so old but big house out in the sticks, and I was about 15 at the time, and in my bedroom I had a plush Mariner Moose, the mascot for the baseball team, sitting on the shelf near the end of my bed. A few weeks into living there at night, I would dream that the moose would get up and pace back and forth across the shelf. Sometimes it's like the moose was in deep thought, and sometimes it would just be a frantic sprint and be twitchy. I wanted to make sure I was dreaming, so the next day I set him in a certain spot on the shelf, put a piece of tape underneath him, and so I knew exactly where, and that night I had a dream again. Woke up in the morning and the moose was sitting at the furthest point from where I set him that night. I was freaked out at this point and thought maybe I wasn't dreaming at all. My next story takes place in the same house and further provoked my belief that the house was haunted. So this may actually just be the house and not necessarily a single item, but let's continue. My mom started a little Christmas wreath making business in the garage. And they'd have the radio on and be listening to music while decorating the wreaths at about the same time. Every day, the radio would somehow change the station to this old-time 40s music. Oh, wow. We thought for a bit that the radio station just changed what it was playing, so one day we decided to watch it. It got about to the time and we noticed the knob on the radio is actually turning by itself to the old-time station. Mom was promptly freaked out and unplugged the radio that day and continued to make wreaths in silence. Aw, I don't know. You can share playlists. Give the spirit a little bit of its own listening time. My next story takes place in Northern California. Me and a few friends were driving home from, it says from Dillon Beach, but I think they mean from Dillon Beach at about 2 a.m. I was the DD, the designated driver, and completely sober. My friends were all pretty wasted in the back seat, and I was driving a Jeep Wrangler with the top down, so no protection from anything. We're about a mile from the beach, and anyone who's ever been around the coast knows it can get really foggy at night. And well, it was. Thick fog, and I was driving slow, so I didn't go off the road or on one of the many curves. My friends are all having a good time laughing and telling stories, and then I slam on the brakes. And they all get mad and say, "What the hell was that for?" I just said, "Look." And in front of the Jeep, illuminated by the headlights, was this thing. It had an arched back. It was pretty hairy, but pieces seemed to be falling off. It wasn't walking normally, like a dog. It kind of waddled and was bigger than a dog. The arched back easily went up higher than the hood of my Jeep. And the walk, well, the walk is what made it bad. It was twitching across the road, like it was having a seizure or something. At that point, I didn't see its face until about the time it hit the other side of the road, where it froze and snapped its head and looked at all of us in the car. Then it got up on its hind legs and sprinted into the woods. The face looked not of a dog or a bear or anything wild that could have been there. It really is indescribable, but it looks somewhat like the mix between a dog and human. I legitimately believe I saw a werewolf that night. We all do. I floored it after that, and it was pretty much freaking out for the next few weeks. So yeah, that's what I've seen in my life. Definitely stopped me from sleeping a few nights. That was by a Reddit user, Compact Flash. Now the last one I just think may possibly be a skinwalker. Of course, anyone familiar with the skinwalker legends will know that skinwalkers are shapeshifters. They are these shamanic, or many people believe they're evil shamanic beings or humans that bridged off of the First Nations hundreds or thousands of years ago. But they're very powerful, but usually very evil. And they are known to switch from human form to animal form, and most commonly some form of dog or wolf or whatever, some canid version of themselves. So maybe they caught some skinwalker in the midst of its transformation. I don't know. That would be a horrifying sight, though. Just to hear the way that they describe it, twitching and kind of like spasming across this road, and then to have it just turn and look. Oh, God. That's got to be a nightmare. Wow. next one is number 6. A story told at sea. As background, I'm a warfare officer in the Australian Navy, and I drive warships. God, I don't think I've ever read a story that starts with, I was expecting like I drive a Honda or something. I've never like read one that goes, I drive, and that comes warships. Oh, jeez. All right. Well, it's not your standard fare of driving, but let's see what it says. The easiest way to describe my job is the person who pilots the ship in 4-hour shifts, and when the captain walks onto the bridge, he often takes control of the ship off me, if he requests it. And as such, I often have a team of about 3 to 4 on the bridge at any one time, consisting of a helmsman who physically drives and controls the engine on my behalf, a more senior quartermaster, QM, whose job it is to make sure the admin of the bridge happens while I am busy navigating and talking to the operation room, and another junior warfare officer under training to learn my job. If we have a few of them on board, watches are 4 hours long, with the usual rotation being 4 hours on, 8 hours off, and as such, one of the most bemoaned watch rosters is being the person who gets the afternoon, the 12 to 4 p.m. graveyard shift, midnight to the afternoon, 12 to 4 p.m., or the graveyard shift, which is midnight to 4 a.m., also known in Navy slang as Arvo and Guts Watch. This watch is hated as it gives you the most broken sleep, as everyone on board normally has to be up and about at 6:45 a.m. to start the day. But I digress. What this means is that if you are unlucky enough to get the midnight to 4 a.m. watch, you need to stay awake. Being up on the bridge of a warship, you need to have everything dark so as not to ruin your night vision out the windows and onto the sea. 80% of the ship is asleep, and I personally enjoy the quiet downtime. Weird conversations happen, and more often than not, people start talking about weird things that have happened to them. I'll never forget the one night I was on a patrol boat in the middle of the, I'm going to try to pronounce this, Arafura Sea in northern Australia, and the story that two sailors told me. A patrol boat is smaller than normal warships, so I only had a helmsman on watch with me. We were hundreds of miles in the middle of the ocean, and we're just having a coffee and a laugh while we sat in the dimly lit red dark of the bridge. The muffled thrum of the ship's engine and the sound of our bow cutting through the dark water and the muted static of our VHF radio scanning empty channels being the only sounds. Every now and then the wind would pick up and you'd hear the howl before it deposited a thin spray of water onto our bridge windshields. Hopefully I've set the scene and made you feel what it's like to be in the middle of nowhere late at night. One of the senior engineers had wandered up on the bridge for a coffee, and he was sitting on the stairs that led to the upper deck from the bridge, and I just finished telling my story about our old house to the sailor on the helm, who was a bit freaked out. The helmsman then told me his story, and needless to say, it in turn freaked me out, and I generally like a good unexplained story. His story really reinforced my wariness of Ouija boards, seances, and the such, as this was a prime factor behind the weirdness of the aforementioned house I lived in as a toddler. His story is as follows. The hospital seance. To begin with, the sailor told me how, before joining the Navy, he used to work as a wardsman at the Royal Brisbane Hospital in early 2001. He said it was a great place to work, with other young wardsmen for company, and, as he put it, heaps of hot young nurses. All right. A few of the girls were into seances, and a few of them were living in the hospital grounds in accommodation while they did their internships. One of the girls suggested that one night they go into an abandoned ward and conduct a seance. Because as everyone who works in a long-established hospital will tell you, there are normally hotbeds of weird activity. My mom is a 30-year midwife, and she has some things she said she can't explain, like mothers reporting a smiling, kindly old matron with a weird hat who came in and checked on me in the middle of the night and patted my baby to sleep. Despite there being only 2 young nurses on that shift all night, but I again digress. Thinking it sounded like fun, he said, yeah. And a few nights later, after work, a few of them plus a few nurses he hadn't met before all went up to the disused ward and set up the Ouija board. He said they started the seance and the glass started to move as they had apparently contacted a spirit. He scoffed and thought it was a joke as the glass was moving randomly with everyone putting a finger on it. And of course he thought that the others were moving the glass. He said someone was given a pen and a paper and told to scribe anything that happened. Little did he know that their innocent night was about to get really weird. Apparently someone asked the spirit, "What's your name?" The glass moved and spelled out N-I-G-E-L, Nigel. And they all laughed, and someone else asked, "Are you good or evil?" I have goosebumps as I'm typing this. And the glass moved over to evil. Still scoffing, the sailor said some other questions were asked, but they got back a lot of gibberish, and suddenly, about 2 minutes later, he said the glass started going absolutely nuts, and some people started getting uneasy. Despite this, it seemed to be following a pattern, so someone told the guy scribing to write down what the glass was moving to. He got something like the following, and slowly it started making words. Apparently it read ILLBABY CASSIKILLBABYCA. Oh. After a few more repetitions, the guy scribing went, "Kill baby Cassie." Oh, Cassie kill baby? What the hell does that mean? I joke you not here when I tell you this. The sailor telling the story said this screwed and disturbed him for quite a while. One of the girls in the circle turned pale, held her hand to her mouth, and ran from the room sobbing, hysterically, like a wailing cry of utter terror. He said one of the guys went, "Ha, what's up with her?" One of the other nurses went outside to console her, and the story came back as such. The girl who ran outside confessed to the other girl that she had had a secret abortion 3 weeks prior after finding out she was pregnant. She told no one about the abortion, not her parents, not even her own boyfriend. Her name, you guessed it, was Cassie. That pretty much wrapped up the night, and horrified, the rest of them finished the seance and swore to never do it again. After he finished telling me this, I was pretty freaked out, but the other older sailor, who was in his 40s, just sat there and said nothing, drank his coffee, trying to lighten the mood. I said, "That was a good story, but what about you, Chief?" Which is his rank, and surely you have a good one that you must have heard. I noticed he was looking really uncomfortable, so being a great people manager / officer, laugh out loud, I decided to go for the jugular and shame him into telling it. "Come on, Chief, tell us," I jibed. I probably should have just left it there, but he decided to tell us, and I don't know if it was true or not, but in hindsight, judging how reluctant he was to tell the two of us and how freaked out he looked when he told us, it's inclined to make me think. Here's his story. To set it up, the guy is, as I mentioned, in his 40s, and he'd been in the Navy for over 20 years, working in the engine room as the chief engineering sailor. So he's not a weak-willed guy prone to getting scared. From his posture and the look on his face, I could tell he was really reluctant to tell his story. I've heard sailors tell stories before. I've heard some good ones. And you can tell when someone's pulling your leg. This guy was flat out scared. I almost felt bad that I tried to cajole him to tell his story. Anyway, his story started when he was 6. He said he was in grade 2 of what some of you American readers would know as elementary school. And they had to make papier-mâché dolls for Mother's Day. And he said he ended up making a clown marionette puppet that was suspended on strings. And he said his mother loved it immediately and loved the fact that it was probably the first really creative thing he ever made at school and prior that at kindergarten. She insisted he hang this doll off the curtain rail above his bed, as she loved seeing it hung up in his room for extra color. Now, being 6 years old, he said the novelty of having a clown puppet hanging over his head in bed at night started getting out of hand. After a year or so, he said he actually began to really resent the clown being there. He said he especially hated waking up in the middle of the night and seeing it leering down at him. And after a while, he started to realize that he hated the clown, and his imagination probably made it worse, as he felt like he was being watched. That's creepy. Of a nighttime. It felt like he was being watched of a nighttime. I don't know why it says that. Or wherever this was in his room. He told his mother that he didn't want it hung up above his bed anymore, but he said he could tell she was really hurt by the idea of taking it down, as she really loved it being there. I would have thought that she would have hung it above her bed, but I held back my tongue. One day, after freaking out in his sleep once too often, he took it down and threw it in the rubbish in the kitchen. He said he made sure he put some other rubbish on top of it so his mom wouldn't find it. He went to bed early that night, and he said he felt happy knowing it wasn't above his head anymore on the curtain rod. Next day, he woke to find the paper clown puppet back above his bed. He said he cursed under his breath and thought his mom must have found it, gotten upset and put it back up in his room late that night / early that morning when he was sleeping. He decided not to ask or say anything about it to his mom, as he thought he'd be getting in trouble for trying to throw it out to begin with. A few weeks later, he took it to the wheelie bin outside the house and threw it under some bottles and cans. He placed a large bag of rubbish from the kitchen on top of it and wheeled the bin out for collection by the garbage men the next day. He woke up the next morning to find the bloody clown back above his head and hanging from the curtain rod. As you can imagine, he said he was upset by this point. And in real life, myself and the helmsman both realized that he was visibly shaken from telling us this. And he confronted his mom about it, and he said to her, "Mom, why did you take that clown out of the bin and put it back in my room?" "James, what are you talking about? If you try and get rid of the..." I don't know what this is written kind of badly here. It says, "I'd you try," or why, maybe it's why. "Why did you try and get rid of this doll? Why would you do that? You know how much that means to me. It was one of the first things you made." "Mom, I really don't want it anymore. It scares me." "James, that's nonsense. It's paper mache." He was upset and assumed that his mom was onto him and to retrieve the doll from the rubbish. He left it at that, but decided he would get rid of it once and for all a week later or so. One day when his mom was out and his dad was in the garage fixing the car, he took the puppet up into the backyard and put it in the incinerator. Australian readers will probably remember most people seem to have one of these circular brick areas in their backyards where they were younger for gardening, mulch, etc. He said he lit the match, covered the doll in paper and dried grass. After a few minutes, it was completely charred and had burned to ashes. Giddy with delight, he'd confessed to his mom what he had done later that day when she got home, confident in the fact that now she couldn't do anything about it after the fact. Well, he got grounded and smacked for playing with fire, but he said his mom got over her disappointment and moved on with nothing more being said about it. Or so he thought. That night, he said he dreamed that he woke up, his bedroom door opened slowly, and that the clown, now on fire and in flames, walked into his room and said to him, "You thought you could get rid of me, didn't you? Well, one day you're going to pay for what you did." He said he woke up screaming, which brought his parents running. He was crying, but they assured him it was just a bad dream. He quickly put it behind him, although he said his parents were quite concerned for a few days. Years later, when he was 16, he had another dream. He dreamed, and now people, I can feel the goosebumps running up my legs, that the same clown doll walked into his room on fire and said, "You thought I forgot, didn't you, James? Well, I haven't forgotten. And trust me, one day you will pay." He woke up screaming again and told his mom about that dream. His grandmother, who by his account was one of those hippie types who liked alternative lifestyles, etc., suggested that he see a clairvoyant, mystic gypsy woman she knew for a card palm reading. He thought it couldn't hurt, and he went along with it, and did it despite the skepticism of such rubbish. He said the woman blanched a little when she read his cards and said, "Something or someone very bad wants to hurt you. Have you offended anyone lately or in your life?" He broke down and told her the story of the clown and how it appeared in his dreams when he was younger and again when he was 16. She said to him, "James, this is very bad. If you ever see that clown again, something terrible might happen, and you need to be prepared." At this point, we were quiet on the bridge, and I was letting it all sink in, and I couldn't help but notice that the sailor was shaking. I realized I shouldn't have pushed him to tell this story, and that is evidence he was seriously scared of, and has been his entire life. The helmsman, after a minute of silence, blurted out what I had been thinking. "So, Chief, have you seen it since?" The chief looked at us both and said, "I've never seen it since, and I live in fear of the day. Then I end up dreaming it, that I see it again." And that, ladies and gentlemen, ended our few hours of telling stories. I went and pretended I was checking on the radar chart while the helmsman looked ahead, pretended to check the autopilot. The chief finished his coffee, came and looked over at my shoulder at my new plan on the chart to see where we were, and bid us good night. After the bridge door shut, the helmsman and I looked at each other and uttered a rather prolonged, unified expletive. Whether it was true or not, it was the freakiest story I've ever heard. If he was pulling our leg, it was an Oscar-winning performance. The fact that he was so visibly shaken while telling it, his voice breaking at parts, led me to believe it probably wasn't. If anything, it was very real to him. Another guy I was on watch with said he had a really freaky dream one night. Wasn't a true story, but his dream was freaky as hell at sea. He said he dreamed that he woke up in his bunk on the ship and no one was around. He dreamed he got dressed to go on watch, and all he could hear was the ship creaking and the dull sounds of waves outside on the hull. He said he walked up to the bridge and found the ship on autopilot with no one up there, and thinking it was weird and hearing the creaking, he kept looking around. He said the worst part of the dream was that he opened a cargo hold in the lower part of the ship and found the whole ship's company, some 56 people, swinging by their necks from ropes on the hold of the ship, creaking being the rope swinging and the rock of the ship. Weird. We laughed about it, but he said the dream freaked him out. Funny what the human mind can come up with while we sleep. Yeah, dreams are pretty impressive. And all those last several were submitted by Iron Halo. Iron Halo. Okay. So I think dreams are incredibly profound. I think that I can't say that all dreams mean something, but there's definitely some forms of dreams that we have that do seem to be more than just the musings of an unconscious mind. that perhaps we're experiencing things on a different level of reality, or we're seeing things in terms of premonitions. Some people get premonition dreams. Some people have had moments of communicating with loved ones who've passed on. I've experienced that one. And I think it's amazing. I think it's incredibly powerful and incredibly healing. But I think that also some dreams are just silly, just ridiculous, stupid stuff that our minds do. When I was little, I used to have this nightmare of Dracula and Frankenstein were in my kitchen at the house I grew up in making toast. It was terrifying for a little boy, but I don't think there was anything profound about that, but it was just, it's whatever was going on in my head, I guess. But it was a lot to take in as a kid. So I don't know. I just remember when I woke up from it, it was like, I don't know, some wee hours in the morning. It was all dark and I was like, oh, good God. And I crept out of bed and went in the kitchen and finally got the courage to flip on the kitchen lights. Thank God nobody was in there making toast, but I was ready to get to the bottom of it. So, there's more to this article. And again, please check the description. There's a couple more stories that are also included on here. Now again, not all of them stuck with the haunted toys or whatever, but they all seem to have some, I don't know, some proximity to objects having, impressions. And yeah, I think it's entirely a very real phenomena that objects can have, I don't know, attachments or some part of an impression on them, and it can manifest as hauntings. So, but whatever you think, I don't know. I just hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you all once again. Please spread the word, and if you want to be a guest on the show, you got experiences of your own, remember to go to paranormalportal.net and look for the button that says interview me. It'll launch the calendar app, and you can dial in a date and time that work for you, and we can talk and see what you got to say. So, all right, guys, that's it for me. Until next time. Get out! Guys, thank you so much for joining us here on tonight's show. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please feel free to follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/paranormalportalradio, as well as finding us on Twitter. We're on Twitter at Paranormal Portal, PORTL, and we'd love to have you stop by our YouTube page and subscribe and check out our shows there. We got hundreds of shows, Journeys into the Paranormal Portal, so I hope you'll check it out, guys. We're over there at youtube.com/paranormalportal, so hope to see you guys soon. We'll be back, of course, for more podcasts in the coming days. So we love you all. Be good, be kind, be nice, take care of each other, help each other out, find the magic in every day, and remember to laugh as much as you can.